My daughters are ages 23 and 18, and my son is 14 years old. I have to know where my children are at all times. They have to call me on their cell phone or send me a text.
And I have to say that lots of times I'm just like everybody else.
Gloria, when's the last time you had a car in your garage?
Huh?
When's the last time you had a car in your garage?
I'm everything in my kids' life. My wife says I'm OCD, and I'll make them run up the stairs instead of taking the elevator for physical fitness. But they love it. They love it.
I'm just partial to little girls.
You're a sweetheart, that's what you are.
Little girls, they're just, of course, that's all I had was girls. I had 3 daughters.
I was kind of rough around the edges, but, you know, perfect family. 3 children, dog, cat.
Oh, my sweetest baby.
If I would have went to Hollywood when I wanted to, Clint Eastwood and I would be side by side.
I'm the 12-year-old little girl that was raped and the wrong man went to prison for 17 years.
And your brain just rockets around inside your skull because you think, they couldn't possibly execute me for something I didn't do. Oh my God, they're gonna execute me.
I was a dad, so I couldn't function in a state of constant misery and anger and a grudge. I fought to prove my innocence for over 18 years.
When they told me that they hadn't done it, I was just sick because I thought, well, they don't have the right ones. Now what am I gonna do?
My wife was actually fired once they found out that she was married to me, someone accused of capital murder. And it's not only unfair for the victim's family, it's unfair for society because the real killer is still out there. It was August, hot. We didn't have air conditioning, had fans, the doors were open. And early one morning, we got the shock of our lives when the police just run in and threw us on the floor, handcuffing us. Had more evidence been taken, I think the real killer could have probably been determined before I ever went to trial. My oldest daughter, she was 16 and just becoming a teenager, just learning to drive. It devastated her. She went crazy. There was nothing I can do. It was utter hopelessness. And when I was found not guilty and set free, I knew they weren't going to voluntarily help me in any kind of way. So I thought I would sue them. They said, you either had to bring the real perpetrator to justice or prove your innocence by DNA testing. And I could do neither in my case. Having that on your record when they do a background check, no one's going to hire you. To me, if you're found not guilty, it should automatically be expunged.
The crime occurred on December 9th, 1981. And I was arrested on December 16th in 1981. It was a week later. I was immediately charged with the death penalty. And I was going to law school at the time that the whole case began. The awful thing was the Superior Court judge had been my family law professor. And there's nothing like standing there in front of your professor in handcuffs and chains. But he dismissed the case because there was no evidence against me. I mean, that was the whole point. I didn't do it. 90 days after I went to prison, the guy who testified against me wrote a letter to the Sacramento County DA in which he said, I lied my ass off for you on the stand. I gave you Killian and they suppressed it. My entire family died while I was in prison, with the exception of my 85-year-old uncle. It all seems to circle around time, because time is the only thing you have to do in there. But time is also the one thing that you don't have. You don't have time with your children. You don't have time with your parents. You don't have time to do the things that you want to do. But that's all you have, is time.
Losing Debbie is the hardest thing in the world. I'll never go through anything like that. If it had been a car wreck or something, but it wasn't, it was murder.
For me, what sparked it all too was that You know, she was Pepe's daughter, she was our cousin. I mean, she meant so much more than the last few horrific moments of her life.
She was in her little apartment, and you had no right to do that. Why did you do that? I remember there's this one day that they called me down and they needed to exhume her. I don't want to do that, but I did because, like I told them, nobody wants to know any more than me who done it.
You initially start out with the prosecution and feeling like they're going to seek justice in her name. This is what they do. Pepe called me one day and said, you know, Sugar, have you seen the paper? There's this judge who says that Ron Williamson's gonna get a new trial. You know, the judge apologizes and basically says that this is awful, and then lowered the boom that there had been a DNA match, and that DNA match was actually a man who had testified against Ron and Dennis. After the exoneration that morning, they told us that the man that we had just found out a few minutes before was the actual murderer, that he had escaped from prison that same day and was on the run. They didn't know where he was.
I'd get so tore up and upset because here we go again, you know. But I've got to know who done that to my little girl.
What y'all working on?
My kids, well, my daughters mainly used to say that I was too overprotected, but as they got older, they realized that, okay, she's doing it for a reason, so they just go with the flow now. The day that it happened, by the time I got back home from the hospital, they had crime scene tape up around our apartment. Well, I remember the school bus was coming for the other kids to get on the school bus. At the Superior Court downtown in Goldsboro, we had a trial. The man was convicted. I put walls up because no one could protect that 12-year little girl, so I was gonna protect her now. At work, years later, they asked would I be willing to do a DNA swab. I was 12 years old again, walking back to the detective's office and sitting back there in that room again. When they told me he was gonna be exonerated and Dwayne was not the one that did it, that it was a second person, I'm scared because this man is out for 17 years. He might know where I live at, my kids. No, it did not free me in any way. It was horrible for me. It was horrible. The comments that people was saying that I needed to go to prison, I picked this guy out, I needed to pay. So this system just failed me all the way around. All I knew is that this man has went to prison for 17 years and you telling me he didn't do it. I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel human. I didn't.
I just couldn't believe it. I was so hurt. And at the same time, I just felt like I was just floating away from my body because I had been found guilty of murder. I knew I wasn't the person that they said I was. And these witnesses had never seen me before. The police report described the suspect as 5'10", 165 pounds, and I was 6'2", 220 pounds. I was forced to sit down in a lineup to hide the height and weight difference. But the judge didn't want to hear anything, and I was sentenced to life in prison. My wife and I, we met early on, the very early years of my incarceration, and we got married. When my wife gave birth, I wasn't able to be there because I was in prison. Appeal after appeal, 10 appeals in all, until finally at the 11th hour, after 11 witnesses, in my evidentiary hearing, I prevailed. I had gotten arrested at 22, and I was 40 years old, November 2009. And the judge asked me to rise, and I felt my knees buckling. And the judge says, in this case, I, the court, hereby declare Fernando Bermudez actually innocent. He said, actually innocent. In New York, there is statute to put the mechanics in place for you to get compensated, but it's still a fight. I had a fight for 5.5 years for my compensation.
One of the first things that people ask me when they hear that I do policy work around the wrongfully convicted is, what sort of compensation do people get? Only about 30 states provide any sort of monetary compensation to the wrongfully convicted, and most state laws are woefully inadequate.
I did not know who to believe or who to trust in this whole process. I couldn't even trust myself because I felt like I picked out the wrong person. I was really on the verge of having a nervous breakdown. So the DA, he said, Tamisha, I know this lady that you need to call.
Miss Jennifer!
I called Miss Jennifer that night. We talked for hours. That was the first time I could breathe because someone understood what I was going through.
Because we both had these shared experiences, shared lived experiences of being survivors and rape victims that then resulted in a wrongful conviction case. This person has been wrongfully imprisoned for a crime they didn't commit, and they are free, and this is a beautiful, wonderful occasion. But then you've got this person over here, this family, this crime survivor, who now not only has to reconcile that the system failed, that maybe the identification they made was wrong, but going forward, the media almost like turns on you, and the public begins to blame you. And there is no one there for you to talk to. Like, who are you going to talk to about this? And so more often than not, what we do is we shut down and we just stop talking and we don't share and we hide. And from that springs the depression and anxiety and substance abuse and all kinds of issues that kind of arise from that.
It gave me problems. Like now, I mean, I've basically created my own little cell in this room. I've got a TV in front of me, I've got a chair I eat, sleep, and sit in most of the time. I was never like this. Before, I always had to be outside, had to be doing something. But after being in that little cell for so long, your muscles atrophy. Now I just want to be cooped up and be a recluse. When they would electrocute somebody, you could actually smell flesh burning. And I still have nightmares about that. I have dreams about them walking me around there to the electric chair. And I can't be around a lot of people.
And I always said that if I ever got out, I would do something about all of this mess. We started what I call the Christmas Project the last year that I was in prison. Christmas is one of the hardest times of the year. So is Mother's Day. It's not just that I lost a part of my life. It's that I know what Christmas is like in there and that I can do something about it. At the same time, it can be really heart-wrenching depending on my own emotional state at that particular time. But every time I leave the prison, it impacts me differently. Sometimes I'm just great and having a great time. Other times I can barely make it to my car. I'm just so depressed. And it has to do with how I heal, or don't heal, as the case may be.
Some people are never able to recover from a wrongful conviction. Other clients have become fire chiefs or lawyers. So, I mean, we've seen wide variations in how people are able to put their lives back together.
I was released from New York State prison with nothing. I had no social or psychological help. No money was given to me when I was released to get me on my feet to buy me clothes. Okay. No psychologist with what I would realize was problems in adjusting to the outside world.
I was on track to being a lawyer. I would have had a very good income, and I would have been able to pay into Social Security, and I would get decent Social Security. I do not. And, I mean, there's a couple of thousand of us in this country. And they could simply pass a law that would give us maximum Social Security, and that would be it. I did not get a settlement. I don't have any money. I live with my friend, who's 92 years old, and eventually, you know, that will come to an end. And then what do I do?
I would love to have some teeth so I could smile, so I could eat some of the foods that I love, but due to the opiates and due to no dental care while on death row, my teeth had just broken off.
When you think about what's been taken from the wrongfully convicted, it's incalculable. Yet there are things that we can do to restore people as best that we can, and we ought to be doing this. It's a fundamental issue of fairness.
I mean, we know that for every wrongful conviction, for every exoneree, there is a crime victim or a family member that has now been told the system failed. One of the things that seems to we see over and over again is the survivors or the family members are not given information until the very last moment. Oftentimes they don't know anything's happened until they've seen it in the newsstand.
And so we found out in open court with the rest of the entire town who had killed her. And so they didn't even see fit to tell Debbie's mother. She needed a voice and an advocate that only had Pepe's best interest in heart, that whatever she needed, the first trial, the fourth trial, whatever, that she got that. But when it all goes wrong and there's an exoneration and there's egos and whatever on the line, what Pepe got was, well, I was doing my job. I was just doing my job. I think when there's a wrongful conviction, there's a multitude of victims.
Everyone needs to be held accountable for it. From the beginning, from the first cop that came to the judge, to the jury, because when Dwayne was exonerated, I was the only one that looked like had made the mistake, had did this to him and his family. Nobody else stood up and say, I helped take the blame, I share the blame with this 12-year-old child that feels like that she sent this man to prison. Nobody did that. Nobody.
I don't think there's any one single thing that can be done just to fix wrongful convictions. I mean, the process itself has to change. It has to evolve and be different. We can't just continue to go down this same road and plead ignorance.
There needs to be changes. And that's why I'm so proud of Christy, because she's in this trying to get changes, you know, for people like me.
You can never compensate from holding your babies at night.
You can braid it.
Can I braid it?
Ugh.
I've got one granddaughter now and a little boy on the way, and my daughter is such a good mother. I'm so proud of her. That really keeps me going. I mean, I have a lot of anger built up inside of me for the way the system was. Circumstantial cases shouldn't be allowed. This is basically the only way I can get it out, is going out and talking to people and trying to make it so it won't happen to anyone else.
When I was first released, I would say I was an exoneree, and people would go, what? Now there's a national registry of exoneration. The first thing about fixing a problem is being aware of a problem. The minute society, lawmakers, prosecutors, police, and everybody else says, oh yeah, it happens, then it's going to shift the perspective immediately. It will move things over 10 degrees. And then people will look at it more seriously.
It's going to be okay. Because DNA is only available in a fraction of cases to resolve them, I do not give the criminal justice system a pass for what it did to me, the lives of my family, and the dysfunction it created.
You know, once scientifically supported reforms are in place to prevent wrongful conviction, that benefits the entire system. It helps law enforcement to better solve crime, it prevents the horror of wrongful conviction, and it makes our communities safer.